Well, thank you for coming. Now, if you're sitting in a seat that doesn't have notes or a pen, just get and grab one from another seat. Everybody, you can take home your notes and your pen. All right, so the mystic's journey. I've been a counselor, spiritual counselor, psychic, whatever you want to call it, for 26 years. A little bit over that, but 26 years professionally. And I've had clients that have come, and they're really seeking peace in their life. I mean, when you think about what are you really looking at in life? What do you want life to give you? There's this sense of, yes, we want to fulfill our purpose. Yes, we want to grow spiritually. But one of the things that I find that many people are looking for is to be able to live a fulfilled, peaceful life. Now, one of the interesting things is about the mystic's journey anyway, is that if you want to be what I call a modern mystic or a seeker, we still have to live in this crazy world, don't we? We can't just go live in a monastery where nobody bothers us, where everything, our food is brought to us. We don't have to worry about money. We don't have that. And so I was on Facebook, as usual, and I saw this really funny cartoon. And it said this senior monk was talking to the young monk and said, okay, your final test of enlightenment. And the next scene in the cartoon was the monk was at family dinner for the holiday dinner. And I think about that is really so true. We're seekers on this journey, and we're so spiritual until we get around family, or until we get stuck in traffic, and then all of a sudden our spirituality goes out the window. What I've found is that the true mystic's journey is how to maintain that peace, how to maintain that connection, even in the craziest days. So as I have been doing my work, one of the things that I've found is people have come to me from different traditions. Now, I've worked primarily in New York and now in Virginia, so the majority of my clientele are from Western traditions, Christian, Jewish, or Islamic. That's my main, what I want to say, traditional background. Right? It may not be what they're doing right now, but that's their traditional background. And for millennia, we have looked as seekers to our religious traditions to help us to know, how do we grow spiritually? Not only how do we grow spiritually, but how are we doing? Right? The only place we've really had to go is to our spiritual religious traditions, because that really in the past has been what's been available to us to know if we're on the right track. But that's just not working for people anymore. It's not bringing a sense of satisfaction. Now, we all here are seekers. You wouldn't be drawn to come to a talk that's lectured The Mystic's Journey if you weren't a seeker, right? Unless I paid you, and I don't think I paid anybody, but there is a contest. Make sure you've put your name on the mailing list, because we're going to give away a meditation CD. What I'm finding is that this idea of spiritual maturity, or that sense of peace, it's also called apatheia, we're going to see shortly, but the sense of peace, we want to be able to use our own inner compass to know when we're there, yet we want to have a particular guide. Now, our idea of spiritual maturity, though, is changing. It's not necessarily what our religions have told us, and it's not religion bashing. This is not going to be, you may be disappointed, but this is not going to be a religious bashing talk. And we're going to talk about how the mystics all practiced their religion. They didn't practice mysticism, they practiced their religion. But what we're finding is we're looking for a spiritual maturity that's more inner guided, inner directed, more deep, more personal, more direct. The mystic wants a direct connection to God. I love this picture. I feel like we're shaking off the restrictions that are put on us when our faith tells us someone else has to talk to God for us. My dad, he's gone now, but he was born 1923, and he would say, "Oh no, you don't read the Bible. The priest reads the Bible and he tells you what it means," right? How many of us were raised with this? "Oh no, you don't do that. There is an intermediary that needs to connect." Well, I will tell you, I'm a past life Gnostic, and that just doesn't work for me. And it doesn't work for many of you. So maybe we were together in that past life in Gnosticism. But what we're finding, even polls of the United States tell us the same thing. In 2012, there was a Pew survey, and if you know anything about academic surveys, the Pew surveys are like the top of the line. So in 2012, it told us that more Americans are moving away from organized religion, and many people are including, if they are sticking with an organized religion, they're including a secondary religion. So they may go to their church or their temple or their mosque on their holy day, but then they also are hitting up kirtan on Friday night, right? They're adding extra. Now, I feel this has to do with an interesting 2009 Pew survey where it said 49% of those studied, and this would be the Pew study when they're studying United States, and they're taking a broad a group of people. They're not just, surveying New Agey people. It found that 49% had a sudden religious or spiritual experience. We call those STDs. You have to be careful with those letters. Spiritually transformative experience. STDs. They may have been, to use another acronym, an NDE, a near-death experience, an outer body experience. I was talking with someone the other day who said that they had an experience when they were sleeping. These spiritual experiences are on the rise. Another survey talks about how we're seeing a decrease with association to or connection to Christianity, but not only Christianity, all forms of traditional religion. And I feel what I found, and I feel like all of this goes to support my findings in my 26 years of counseling, is that there's a need for a non-religious specific, in other words, not from one tradition, journey for our spiritual maturity. So this is what I've found. Today's seeker's path, what they're looking for, they want a non-religious specific journey. In other words, they don't want to have to belong to a specific religion, but, or yet, they do not want it to strongly conflict anyway, with their original faith. So it isn't that people are saying, "Oh, I'm going to turn my back on my religious upbringing," but they're saying, "I want to look for more. I want to look for deeper. I want more personal, but I don't necessarily want to conflict too much." Kind of like, it's interesting, when Edgar Cayce first channeled about past lives and karma and all these things, the readings told him, don't look to other religions to find this phenomenon. Just keep reading your Bible and you'll find it. And by reading his Bible, if you know anything about Cayce, he read it over and over again. He was able to come to terms because he found all of these beliefs that were coming through him as a channel within his traditional religion. So the seeker's path is a non-religious specific, but not conflicting with original faith, without an intermediary. I want to touch this flower. I don't want Cindy to tell me what it feels like. And yes, they're real. I don't want Cindy to tell me what that feels like or what that smells like. And I want to be able to experience it. And I want my success inwardly validated. I don't want you to tell me that because you have not had an outer body experience that you have not achieved spiritual oneness, right? I don't want someone else telling me how to do that. So spiritual maturity, how I define it for this talk, and I'm not saying I am there, believe me, is union with the divine, knowledge of the divine. We are not going to be talking about redemption or grace. Why? Redemption is religious specific. How one religion says you're redeemed is different than another religion. So redemption is not a part of this discussion. Neither is grace. All of the mystics say grace is important, but grace is a gift. You cannot pray your way to grace. You cannot beg your way to grace. You cannot bargain your way to grace. What the mystics tell us is that as far as grace, you either get it or you don't. It's not based on what you do. So what I'm focusing on are things we can actually do. So this is why redemption and grace are not a part of this talk. So who's a mystic? Well, first of all, I love this image, yeah. Anyway, first of all, a mystic is someone that has achieved union with God. You can read that on the screen. But for this study, I'm looking at mystics who have left behind instruction on how you can achieve union with God. And remember what I said in the beginning, mystics don't practice mysticism. They practice their religion and get really good at it. So they practice their faith, and they, through that practice, get that. Oops, I guess I'm hitting something. Through that, they get that connection, that personal connection. So these are the mystics that we're going to look at. Evagrius, to be honest, I have no idea how to say his name. Evagrius Ponticus, he was a 4th century desert monk. We're going to talk a lot about him. Teresa of Avila, I was pronouncing it Avila wrong for many years. She is the beloved 16th century Carmelite nun. I think she is probably one of the most famous mystics. But then there's Krishnamurti. So you'll notice I've pulled 2 Christian and 1 non-Christian mystic into this. Now, Krishnamurti, he was a little bit of everything. When Charles Ledbetter saw him on a beach for the first time as a young man, he said that Krishnamurti had the purest aura he had ever seen. And then finally, we're going to add some Cayce, because my original thesis, which I did a number of years ago, was based on those 3 mystics. But now reading Cayce, because I'm doing a lot of Cayce reading, obviously, I'm finding, ooh, Cayce fits into this really well. So we're going to look at Cayce as well. So I'm going to quickly outline the journey. So you're going to get a little precursor. And then I'm going to go into each mystic and show how each mystic gave their own take on it. But you'll find the similarities are stunning. So the 4 mystics agree. You purge negative traits, you take on positive traits. These enhance the seeker. These enhance us both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So we do that. And we gain this sense of passionlessness, where we feel calm and loving and peaceful. We're not disturbed by the person that just cut us off in traffic, or the person that you go to Thanksgiving and they have a different political view than you do. Have I said I'm not there yet? But you have to make sure you include, according to these mystics, some prayer, meditation, and contemplation. Now, some are very linear. They say you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and some mix it all up. But this all leads to a profound sense or experience of love. Not experienced with the senses. This is why that meditation and contemplation and prayer is so important, because we need to distract the senses so that we can drop them and experience the divine directly without those senses. And this results in direct communication, an intimate knowledge of God, and boom, we're there. Spiritual union. So let's talk about them individually. Evagrius, that's how I'm going to pronounce it. He was born a long time ago. He was a 4th century desert monk. Now it's kind of interesting. Evagrius and Edgar Cayce, many years apart, and I can 99.9% tell you, because Kevin Tedeschi told me, Evagrius was never read. In other words, Cayce never read Evagrius, and probably never read Origin, because he was like considered heretical, and was not even a big Plato guy. So, but Evagrius told this story of the creation of the soul, and it aligns amazingly well with Edgar Cayce. And so one of the reasons to become a member at the A.R.E. is so that you can get the venture inward. So in January, you can read my fabulous article on all of that. So Evagrius was a 4th century desert monk in Egypt. He was born in present-day Turkey. He was an archdeacon at that tricky economical council, Second Economical Council in 381, where they really did a lot of tricky changes in Christianity. He fell in love, but never consummated his love, with a married woman. Now, he was an archdeacon, so this was a bit of a tricky situation for him. He had a dream that basically said, "Leave Constantinople, go to the Holy Land to save your soul." And so being the good archdeacon that he did, off he went. He went to Constantinople. Left Constantinople for the Holy Land. And there he met this lady Melania and Rufinus, who were Origin people. Now, if you know anything about Origin, he was claimed heretical for some of his beliefs, some of them being reincarnation and such. So he went there, and so he's in the Holy Land, and guess what happens? And this to me is hope. He fell down again. But it gives me hope, because I know every time I mess up, at least this mystic messed up a few times. So he got comfy, he started liking the material world, and he got sick. And Melania told him, "You broke your vow. That's why you're sick." So off he goes again to monastery life. He's like, "I cannot behave in the city. I'm going to the monastery," where he was miraculously healed. And he felt because he had returned to his vow. He traveled, and eventually he moved to what's called the cells, which are the desert fathers. And he prayed and wrote and lived kind of an ascetic life until he died. But he lived a full life. So he basically told us that we need to purge our thoughts or passions, or he called them demons, and then attract virtues. So now, have you ever heard of the 7 deadly sins? Yep, we've all heard of the 7 deadly sins. Well, he was big on the 7 deadly sins. Just want to make sure I'm on the right slide. So the first one was gluttony. So in today's language, or that movie, that horrible movie about the 7 deadly sins. Anyway, it was in the modern day, it's to overeat, right? But gluttony back in the day did not mean to overeat. What it meant was to be distracted by thoughts of illness, lack of food, needing doctor's care. So we see that gluttony has gotten mixed up. And one of the things is he was known for being the 7 deadly sins, but he never said that they were sins. He said they were thoughts that distracted us. Kind of like Cayce said that sins are missteps. So they just saw these as missteps. Impurity. Well, that one's pretty much means the same thing today. Lustful thoughts. But for him, he was a monk. So it gave an extra oomph to why you didn't want that one. Avarice. We see that as greed. But it was much more than that. For him, it meant this fear of living a long life, and having to not be able to work, and having to take charity from others. Right? How many of us have avarice? It's not a sin. It's just life. We don't want to have to take from others. Then sadness, anger. I love this one. Anger he saw as being mad at a fellow monk who had offended or injured him. Now, acedia. This is one that's kind of gotten lost, but it could be seen as listlessness or boredom. Between 10 and 2, they only ate once a day, and that was at 2 o'clock, and that was dinner. And so they called it the noonday demon. Between 10 and 2, the monk would be looking out the window to see who's coming to a visit, or like they wouldn't want to study. They get bored with life. That was acedia. Vainglory. I never knew what vainglory meant until I did this, but it's subtle. It grows when you're practicing virtue. And so you're getting better and better. You're getting more virtuous and more virtuous. And why isn't everybody noticing and coming to listen to me talk? Right? We should be sought out. That's vainglory. And pride was the most dangerous. It wasn't pride in, I put together this talk. No, it's pride for saying, I put together the talk. The Creator put together the talk. I am only the avenue in which this information comes through. But then, Evagrius would teach us that if you get rid of these thoughts, demons, whatever you want to call them, these passions, then we automatically take on virtues, like continence, which has a different meaning today, clarity, charity, temperance, courage, patience, prudence, understanding, and wisdom. So it was a trade-off. If you could get rid of this, you would get that. And that's the first stage of the mystic's journey. Get rid of the negative traits and get the positive traits. Well, if anybody has listened to my class on ideals, which I know some people have over in the corner, it sounds a lot like ideals. So once you do that, you get to this place of passionlessness. Nothing bothers you, not even in your dreams. I just went for a reading yesterday with Maya, lovely girl. She's actually works out front. And she's a very good psychic. And I said, life is good, but by my dreams, you wouldn't know it. And so we did a reading because knowing this mystic's journey, I know that I want to have my dreams match my daily life. And I'm really happy. Life is good. I'm giving talks at A.R.E. and I feel like I'm at a good place. My dreams aren't. So I have not achieved apatheia. Maybe it's because I haven't gotten rid of all those vices. Then we get to contemplation. So Evagrius says, first you go and you work on all of those vices and those getting those good attributes. Then you get to this place of calm and peace, and then you start contemplation. So contemplation, he recommends in different stages. First, we contemplate the divine in nature. How many people have gone out into nature and said, God lives here. God lives here. But the second stage is to look at that person that just cut you off in traffic and go, God lives there. God lives there. So the second step is second step of contemplation, which could be a meditation, is meditating on the divine in all things. Thomas Merton had his breakthrough when he was grocery shopping. I think he was doing some sort of shopping in town. He comes out of the store and he looks and he sees God everywhere. God in every single person. That was Thomas Merton's aha moment. So then once you've contemplated, you start to become in the habit of ceaseless, silent prayer. How many of you have used your driving time, still paying attention, mind you, to what you're doing, for prayer? It's a wonderful, when I used to live in central New York, my prayer would be, please keep the animals off the road. Please keep the animals, because I've hit a deer, right? Please keep the animals. That was my prayer, but it was prayer. It counted, right? I was talking to God. But then this imageless, short, ceaseless prayer takes us to mystical knowledge, and we rise up to God, and we gain that intimacy that we are so seeking. Many of us seek it in friends and relationships, but I can tell you it is your soul wanting intimacy with God. Into you me see. But it's really done through this pure prayer, because we need to I don't want to should on you, right? In order to have this intimate knowledge, the mind needs to go away, because we want to experience without our senses. And this is usually done in deep meditation. Now, this is your handout. I don't expect you to read this. Please don't, but you have it in a handout. But this basically shows the first stage is kind of an ascetic practice. We release the passions, we gain the virtues, then we achieve this apatheia, or this passionlessness, and we feel loving towards everyone. This was Thomas Merton coming out and going, oh, I see God everywhere. And then we add some meditation, a couple stages, and then we go into true prayer. So this is Evagrius's journey towards spiritual maturity. And what I have found is this, to me, in my research, because I researched a lot more than the 3 mystics I used in the paper, but this is what I found for many of the mystics was their blueprint. Now, they may have done it in different orders, they may have done it differently, which I'm going to show, but this is basically the blueprint. So if you say, I want to achieve spiritual maturity, I call it, because remember, we're getting rid of redemption, we're getting rid of grace. I want to get mature spiritually. These are the types of things that you're going to be working on, you know? And I have to say, I think I'm still here and here, because I definitely get annoyed when someone cuts me off in traffic. So, Teresa of Avila, she actually was Jewish. Did anybody know that? She was the biggest Christian nun was Jewish, but her family was forced to convert because of the Inquisition. And then she became, her and her mother, her mother died at a young age. We're going to talk about that. But her and her mother became very devout. They really grabbed on with all gusto to that Christian. Maybe it's because their head was threatened, but they grabbed onto it with a gusto. Now, she lost her mother at 13, but she was a girly girl. She loved to dress up and dance and have fun. You know, she wasn't serious forever. She had a flirtation. Sound familiar? Flirtation seems to be. So if you flirted, you are on your way to being a mystic. So she was sent to a convent at 16 because her father was going to have none of that. But she became deathly ill within a year. One of the things you'll see again and again with mystics is illness. And she was sent home where she survived. She was healed. But then she became ill again. She feared for her soul. So when she recovered, quite miraculously, as a matter of fact, they had already put the nickels on her eyes, basically. They used a wax at those days, but they had given her her last rite. She came back, and much to her father's chagrin, she became a Carmelite nun. She was known to be petty, moody, and bad-tempered. That seems like repetitive, doesn't it? She obeyed God over her superiors. So if you won't listen to your superiors, you are on your way to mysticism. So late in life, I would say late in life for a Carmelite nun in the 14th century, I think she was maybe 40 years old. And it was later, or maybe in her 30s. But anyway, she went in to do her prayers, and it's like for the first time in her consciousness, she really saw Jesus on the cross. She really saw. And she sobbed. And she said, again, remember she was a little temperamental, I am not getting up until you give me what I want. She said that to God. Now, I will not recommend this because you will get it. And so she all of a sudden realized that her whole life had not been devoted to Christ and that she had not been doing what she had promised she would do. And she sobbed and finally got over herself, and she became selfless. And the tears gave way to unconditional love. She wrote beautiful love poetry to Christ and to God. It is stunning. If you can get past the I'm just a poor woman, but she was trying to keep the inquisitors happy because women weren't supposed to have direct connection with God. No one was, actually. So that was a little bit of a no-no. But she would keep saying how terrible she is. So if you read Teresa of Avila, just skip that part. It's to keep the Inquisition happy. And she devoted the rest of her life to Christ. But she was ill her whole life. She would levitate, and she was really embarrassed by that. You know, she would want the other nuns to hold her feet down, But she would have such ecstatic. And if you read some of her stuff, she would have such ecstatic experience. She would levitate. She would swoon. She would just pass out. Her famous analogy was comparing the soul to a crystal. And she said, I began to think of the soul as if it was a castle made of a single diamond or a very clear crystal in which there are many rooms. Just as in heaven, there are many mansions. And so for her, the goal was inward. This was to get to the center, and so she went deeper and deeper and deeper into her soul. And when she got into there were 7 of them, when she got into the 7th room, that was union. That was the sacred marriage. But hers was an inward journey, so let's talk a little bit about it. If I could title hers, which I did on this slide, you can't see, because this is much prettier to look at. Pray, pray, pray. So Teresa of Avila was pray, pray, pray. But she had these mansions, and they went 1 to 7. In the first mansion, she would say, there's reptiles all around this mansion. This is the door to the mansion. And these would be temptations. So like Evagrius said, you got to get rid of those temptations, which would be those things that we saw, that list. In the second, once you get through that, okay, you're working on, and you don't totally get rid of your temptations, but you get their distractions and things, and so that you can pray, because she's pray, pray, pray. Then you align your will with God's will. Thy will be done. And we release more passions. Then you go into the third room, and prayer is a little stale. Haven't we been there, whether it's our prayer or our meditation, whatever our spiritual practice, it's like, I'm doing it again and it just isn't doing it for me, right? It gets stale. Well, she's like, that's okay, keep doing your routine. Don't break your routine, but start increasing your virtues. Start being of service. Start increasing those virtues. In the 4th, now we're in the 4th room, prayer kind of works up again, but we're doing contemplative prayer. That's when you take, and this is what Cayce recommends, you take an idea or a passage of the Bible or a passage, now you could take a Facebook meme, right? We don't have to be so, we don't have to be so religious specific. And you just contemplate it. And you focus on that. And you allow everything to drop off, but that focus on that idea, that contemplation. So you're also at that time, you're releasing pride and vainglory, because I'm sure you have fabulous thoughts, but you are supposed to be focused on that contemplation. And be patient with your prayer. You get into the 5th, remember there's only 7, so we're going pretty deep. Temptation is gone. Oh, I want to go just get me the elevator to the 5th floor, thank you. You're still increasing your virtues, but you're not being tempted, because this time, and I know people that have said this, I have not gotten to this point, but I could meditate all day. I'm just in heaven when I'm meditating. Well, maybe that's literal, but it's where your inner spiritual life is more exciting than the outward temptations of life, right? You want to go to a party and drink all night? No, I'd rather go and read my spiritual book and meditate for a bit, right? The outer temptations aren't there as much. Then we go into this silent prayer in the 6th house. There's no words, no images. This is another thing Cayce teaches. Look at the feeling. So if I want to meditate on the glory of the divinity in this plant, I don't think of the plant. I don't think of the words, this plant is divine. I feel. What does that feel? What does that bring up in me? What does that give me? And I go into meditation with that feeling. Wordless, imageless. But what Teresa would say is not the divinity of the plant, but my love for, because remember, her lens was Christian, my love for Christ. What is that love of the divine? Take that feeling when you see something in nature and you go, oh, God is there. How does that make you feel? Contemplate and meditate on that. Just re-feel that feeling and keep praying. That's what she says. Because in the sixth house, God leaves. We call this the dark night of the soul. It's like, hello, anybody home? You know, you're not getting that whoosh that made you leave all those temptations behind. So at that point, she says, practice charity. Practice charity. Take it out of you and give it to somebody else. But then we go into the seventh house, and God's returned. We have come to the innermost corridor of our soul. This is where the sacred marriage, this is where we become one. But just like any marriage, maybe honeymoon's great, but you got to go out in the world. And you got to deal with stuff. So then we have to balance, and this is very painful. And near-death experiencers, spiritual transformative experiencers, they experience this because they've been to that height, but now they have to do the laundry. They got to go make money. Well, but I've seen what's really important, and that car is not, right? But your wife thought it was before you had that experience. Well, I'm sorry. And so very often at this phase, relationships, unless you have a partner that has similar ideals, back to Cayce, the marriage or the partnership could fall apart. But now, this is interesting because Teresa's a female mystic, and I did not find this conversation in the men mystics. But Teresa says, then you take what you learned, like Joseph Campbell's journey, the hero's journey, and you bring it back into your world so that you practice that love and that apatheia, that passionlessness with everything and everything you do. So that just as your prayer was important, your watering of the plant is just as important. It is just as much an act of God. It is just as much as a connection. So you take what you've learned and you bring it out into the world. Teresa of Avila is what some of the most beautiful reading and you will ever read. She uses analogies and metaphors, and I know I am not educated in this. I always use the wrong word. She uses stories and to represent what she's talking about. She's very big. A lot of the mystics are big on tears. You know when you cry because you're happy or you're overwhelmed, not because it's been a bad day? Those tears. And so she talks about those tears. At first, when you're first in your stages, it's like the tears are water for your garden. And at the first stages, you have to dig deep. You have to go into the well, and you have to lower the bucket, and you have to dig deep for those tears of spiritual gratitude. And you water the garden that way. After you've been doing it a while, it's almost as if you have an irrigation system, right? And so you turn the irrigation system, and it starts to bring the water. But eventually, when you get to that sacred union, God just reigns. You don't have to do a darn thing. Some of her analogies are so beautiful. There's another one about a butterfly. There's a lot of them. Krishnamurti. I love that picture of Krishnamurti. Krishnamurti, again, mother died young. He was born of the Brahmin caste. And if you know anything about the caste system, that's the tippity-toppity tip. As a matter of fact, in his family, when he was younger, if a European walked into the house, they had to wash everything in the house. They had to wash the kids, the clothes, they had to wash everything because the Brahmin were the top caste and the Europeans weren't, I guess, seen as well. He almost died of malaria. He did have a near-death type experience. At 13 years old, he, through the Theosophical Society, he was found by the Theosophical Society in India. And at 13 years old, he would go and visit the masters in his dreams or in his meditations, and he wrote at the feet of the masters. It is, I would say, one of I guess that's a book we should have gotten. Sorry, I wasn't thinking, Rosie. At the Feet of the Masters, they may have it in the bookstore. If not, they can order it for you. It is, I think, one of the seminal books written on the journey of the mystic, and we're going to talk about it. He was egoed up. He was brought up to be the world teacher by the Theosophical Society, and he played that role for a while. But in his, I believe he was in his 20s, I'm not 100% sure, he said, you know what? We're all the world teacher. None of us are the world teacher. And this is a bunch of bunk. Nobody can tell you what journey you're supposed to take, how you're supposed to do it. He would not even tell people how to, he gave some clues on meditation, but he was like, you got to find your own path, and nobody can tell you where you're in, what path you're on, and what's the best for you. So these are some of his teachings. He also said, he did it backwards, which I like better. He said, work on the virtues, like Cayce did, work on the ideals. Work on your virtues, and you'll automatically get rid of those passions, right? So he did it in the positive, whereas the early Christians did it in the negative. Work on the passions, and you'll get the virtues. Krishnamurti said, work on the virtues, and you'll get rid of those passions. So the first thing he taught was discrimination, which has a different meaning in today's language. So I would rename it as discernment. Discernment. Know what's real and not real. Know what's important and not important. And if it's important, you stand up for it. You go, right? If it's not important, let it go. If it really doesn't matter in the big scheme of things, so what? Right? Discern what's real and unreal. Gain control over your emotions and your mind. Use discernment in speech. He was the one, well, many people have said that. He's one of the ones that would say, is it kind? Is it useful? Is it true? Is it necessary? If we all could do that, right? Is it kind? Is it useful? That's why I said, I am not there yet. I just had a really fun, gossipy conversation the other day. And Dave goes, who were you gossiping with? And I will not say who I was gossiping with. But it was fun. You know, like I still have that where it's fun to talk about things. I could have spun it. I was saying, no, I was giving my educated opinion on something. Be discernment in speech. Be gentle, accommodating, be of service. What he said was, the way that you can be discerning is to study all religions, not just the one that you were brought into. Gain education. He said the most dangerous thing is an uneducated person. Educate yourself. Gain desirelessness. So we have discrimination, which you can think of as discernment, desirelessness, including desiring spiritual, mystic level, spiritual experiences. Because desires keep you out of what we're going to call that apatheia, that passionlessness. Good conduct. Get control of that mind. Be mindful. You know, sometimes when I'm angry or annoyed, I give myself 5 minutes. I set my alarm. Okay, you got 5 minutes to process this and then get over it. Right? How important is it? If it calls for action, take action. If not, let it go. Avoid laziness. Let other people do their work. Oh my goodness, if everybody cleaned their own house, we wouldn't have to be so busy cleaning everybody's house. If they ask you for help, that's different. But he would say, you don't help unless someone asks for it. Let them do their work. Let them do their karma. Be tolerant and keep your focus on evolution. And he said, love is the only path. So then he also said, meditate. But his meditation was a little different. Meditate on the messiness of the world. If you can meditate on how things really are, instead of how you want them to be, you will no longer have your mind interfering in life. Observe the disorder. Look at what really is not how you're told it is, right? right? So he's developing discernment. So because this creates an order, a life, without contradiction, without duality, without conflict with what's real. Oh, today it's raining. Oh, okay. Oh, today it's sunny. Oh, okay. Now, it doesn't mean I don't plan really fun things to do when it's sunny, but I'm not going to try to pretend it's sunny when it's raining. And when your mind can be completely still, having no contradictions, because you can see, there's not a contradiction. I really wanted these to be green, not orange, right? I can see they're orange. It's not a contradiction anymore. I see it as it is. I don't want it to be something else. I'm not pretending. I'm not having to put like, how much time do you spend pretending that someone that you know is really Miss Cranky Pants is a nice person? You know, how much energy does that take? How much conflict? So that because we can discern somebody's a cranky pants. We don't have to judge them as good or bad. That's what discernment is. We can see it for what it is. But when we don't feel we need to judge it, when we can just see it, oh, somebody's having a cranky day. Okay. We don't have to say, oh my God, that person, I can't believe they're cranky again. Right? That's true discernment. When we can see something, we recognize what it is, then we don't have the conflict anymore. Then we can meditate without our mind in conflict. And that's how Krishnamurti recommends we obtain that spiritual maturity. Discrimination, desirelessness, good conduct, love, and meditation. So Edgar Cayce, this is our buddy, right? I'm not going to go too much about telling you about Edgar Cayce. I'll tell you a little bit because I have to, but I'm not going to go too deep. Edgar Cayce was born in 1877 and died in 1945. I always think of Edgar Cayce as dying from compassion. I think compassion killed Edgar Cayce. He was told he could live into his 80s if he did one reading in the morning and one reading in the night. I'm sure you know he was a psychic. Trance channel, you might call him. Medical intuitive. Brilliant medical intuitive. But he got compassionate. And he could not stand during the war just to read these letters of mothers needing to know about their children or other issues. And so he started doing 8 readings that, he would stay in trance for the day. And he ended up dying young because of it. He had some people say he had an NDE as a child. But he could see, whether he had the NDE or not, he could see elementals, his dead grandfather, deceased people, auras. He could see all that stuff. He wanted to be a preacher, but God had other things in mind for him. Every year he read the Bible from cover to cover. And if you've read Edgar Cayce, it's written, or it's spoken, his channel spoke in Bible-ese. So you sometimes have to translate it. He met an angel at a young age. The angel said, "What do you want?" I would have said, "Roller skates." He said, "I want to help people, especially children." The angel said, "Your wish is my command." He cured himself first in a sleep state, and then later on, he cured himself again of laryngitis, and it goes from there. He did over 14,000 readings on 10,000 topics. And in 1924, someone said, "Where did this illness originate?" And that's when past lives started coming into the picture. So now Cayce, that slide's a little wonky. That says Christ consciousness is oneness consciousness. This slide actually is not supposed to be there. All right, well. Anyway, so Christ consciousness is how Cayce saw spiritual maturity. And that Christ consciousness is the same as oneness consciousness. Cayce said that Jesus was Jesus, a man who gained Christ consciousness. He gained that oneness consciousness. He gained the knowledge that I am God, God is me, I am you. Like Thomas Merton, everyone is God. And he said that when you can live that, then you are Christ consciousness. Now, he talked about the fruits of the Spirit. I just recently learned, watching a talk by Kevin Tedeschi, that this came from the Galatians. So last night, while I was researching this, or finishing, you got to reread it a few times before you give the talk, I looked it up. And Galatians 5:22-23 talks about these fruits of the Spirit. The 9 attributes, although Cayce has many more fruits of the Spirit, 9 attributes of a person or a community living in accord with the Holy Spirit. And they were love, joy, peace, forbearance, which basically is patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Now, don't they sound an awful lot like what we've already been hearing all along? So Cayce said that these are ideals, that when we live our life to our ideals, when we work on developing virtues, then all of the negative will fall away. When you have that ultimate ideal of oneness consciousness, you can't be obnoxious to somebody else because you might as well just, hit yourself in the face. Or you might as well insult God, the divine, whatever you call that higher. If you are going to give somebody the finger because they caught you up in traffic, you better just imagine that's Jesus in that car, or that's Buddha in that car, or that's Krishna in that car. Because when you have oneness consciousness, when you have that Christ consciousness, you realize that we're all that. It's a famous Hindu Upanishad. You are that. I am that I am. I am that I am. But it's interesting because he also had the fruits of evil. And this you don't see in the Cayce teachings. But thank you to, forgetting her name. I just was talking to her a couple minutes ago. Judith Stevens from the prison program. She, not because she's part of the prison program. Let's not put prison program and the fruits of evil together, right? This had to do with the Search for God group we belong to. By the way, anybody is welcome to join our Monday Search for God group. If you're interested in the Cayce and you don't have to be a forever Search the God person. You can just come when you want. It's Monday at 4:00. It meets upstairs by the cafeteria. So anyway, the fruits of evil, passions, doubt, fear, avarice, greed, selfishness, self-will, hate, contention, strife, fault-finding, lover of self, lover of praise, jealousy, backbiting. And I have the readings here if you want to know where they came from. So what Cayce said, basically, it's not some great deed that makes you amazing. It's just being kind, gentle, patient, long-suffering. Long-suffering is one that gets a bad rap. People are like, well, why would I want to be long-suffering? You all have been long-suffering. You all had the uncle or the aunt that was difficult, but you loved them anyway. And so at the holiday meal, you'd sit and say, hello, Aunt Mary, how you doing? But it was suffering because she was just, well, I'll tell you, life stinks. Right? We've all had that relative. But you love them, so you sit with them anyway. That's long-suffering. In a more Christian background, that would be Jesus putting up with all of us. Forgive them, they know not what they do. Right? If you want to put in the Christian context. So then, when our soul knows that my spirit, my soul, witnesses all that oneness consciousness within myself, that is when we have reached that spiritual maturity. Now, for Cayce, he left behind the Search for God readings, right? That was his instructions for spiritual maturity. As a matter of fact, they came out of a group of people, went to Cayce and said, Cayce, can you help us grow spiritually and psychically? He said, sure, let's do some readings on it. And there's a whole series called The Search for God. But there's books in the bookstore called The Search for God, and there's book 1, book 2. There's also Contemporary Cayce. Do we see it over there? Contemporary Cayce, which is basically a summation of the Search for God readings. But it's written not in Cayce language. It's written by Kevin Tedeschi and Henry Reed, so you can actually read it. But Cayce recommends the same things. Get rid of those, attract those virtues, those ideals. Get rid of those passions, those habits that aren't good. Come to a pace of love through oneness consciousness, and meditate, pray, and contemplate. Same thing. Now, more research is needed because I feel that Cayce really fits in with this mystic category, but I need to do more work. And I have one book in front of it, but this will be my next book, and it hopefully will be called The Mystic's Journey by Cindy Griffith. So here's some similarities. Many of the mystics had illnesses. Many of them, across time, not just the ones that I'm working on, lost their mother young. Many felt they failed their faith. They devoted their life to God or the master. In theosophy, you have the ascended masters, and so you would devote your life to the master's plan. But the master's plan was our evolution to be able to get back to oneness, so it matched any faith's divine plan. Many of them were persecuted in some way. They doubted Edgar Cayce so much that in a trance they did nasty things to his fingernails. Let's just leave it at that. So they were all persecuted in some way. They didn't believe he was really in trance, and so they tested it. They believed their life was divinely guided. Divinely guided. They all agree, purge and attract. Purge and attract. Whether they focused on the purging or the attracting, that may differ. But that these steps enhanced us physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. We'd get to this state of passionlessness, which was feeling calm and peaceful, even in our dreams. And then we would turn the focus inward through, isn't that a beautiful picture, by the way? I love that one. Turn your focus inward, your mental faculties and emotions through prayer, meditation, and contemplation. There's a book over there on the end called A Voice as Old as Time, and it's filled with contemplations. It's a book on contemplation meditation. So if you're interested in practicing contemplation, I highly recommend it. The fact that it's my husband's book is shamelessly self-promoting. But they sell it here, so A.R.E is making profit on it. But this is without an intermediary, without words and images. And this leads to this profound love, direct communication, oneness. I'm not sure what happened there. Just in case you weren't sure, it's an intimate knowledge of God. And what's intimate knowledge? When we really know someone, whether it's a lover or a friend, you can be with them in silence, and many words are spoken. When we can drop the words and just be in connection, this is what the mystic's journey allows us. And to experience profound love, because if I can tell you one thing that I have learned experientially, through my channeling, which is different than a deep meditative prayer state, is that you have no concept how strongly you are loved. There is nothing you could do or say that would minimize that love that is available for you. Any questions? Yes.
Prayer and meditation and
contemplation.
Well, you indicated and talked about prayer,
Mm-hmm.
and then meditation as something different, and then you did bring up contemplation. But can you explain a little bit in regards to the differences between prayer and meditation?
Absolutely. So the question is, what's the difference between prayer and meditation? Prayer is speaking to God, but then we get to this level in mystic prayer where we lose the words, where we are reaching outward to the connection of the divine. Meditation, we're going inward and we're listening to God. We're quieting our minds so that God can talk to us. And in prayer, in the type of prayer, it's not you're reciting the Lord's Prayer kind of prayer. It's not a rote prayer. It starts out with words and basically saying something to the effect, in mystical prayer, come to me, be with me, be in my life, be a part of me, let me experience you. Thy will be done. Guide my life. It's not a, oh God, I really want this job. It's not that kind of prayer. No, there's nothing wrong with that kind of prayer. You can ask parking lot angel. You can do that. But this is a more deep. And then what happens, and I've experienced some of this. I'm constantly talking to God. Not all the time, but I have times in my life where I'm constantly talking to God. And I might see this flower and I'd be like, oh God, thank you for that flower. This is just so beautiful. Because actually these are beautiful flowers, aren't they? Thank you for that. And I was going to move them, Kevin. I'm so glad I didn't move them. Kevin put these for us here, the AV guy. And I'm constantly in conversation. But then it becomes an outward appreciation without words. So I'm just, if I could say that feeling of gratitude that I have towards God, and I put it out there without words, that would be wordless prayer. So what the mystics are saying is this should be, I don't want to should on you. What the mystics are saying is this ends up being continuous. That we are continuous in prayer. Now, some of that might be, thy will be done, thy will be done. Some of it may be in a mantra style. Some of it may be in a communication style or conversation style, But that it gets to this place where it is in union, where there are no words. Meditation can start with a contemplation. What Cayce would recommend is you start with you do some neck things and some breathing things, and then you start with a contemplation. So you may take a passage. So for example, shameless promotion. For example, let's see. This is called bibliomancy. This is not the way this book is designed, but it works really good. So you say, what do I need? Okay. So it's a chapter on energetic exchange. In the light, we see the interconnection between all things in our universe. Okay, that's what I'm going to contemplate on today. I mean, it's much longer, if you like longer contemplations. In the universe, we see the connection. So I'm going to do a meditation. I'm going to contemplate that. What does that mean to me? Let me think about that. Well, what does that bring up? And I go through, I may just repeat it for a while. I can't repeat it now because it's out of my brain, but you know what I mean. I may repeat that for a while about that interconnection and being in the light. And what would that feel like? And so I contemplate that. But what happens is in that contemplation, then our mind is so busy contemplating that, spirit goes, ooh, opportunity. Mind is busy. Kind of like I get the best information when I'm in the shower or driving because my mind is busy or doing the dishes. So then through that, then you may even sense or know, well, I am the light. And that's why everything is interconnected. We all are the light. And so boom, 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 you're in a different meditation. Then you're into a meditation. So contemplation and meditation. You can also do the, sit like a pretzel and om. That's a form of meditation. I have a whole book on those. soul soothers. There's like 25 different simple meditations you can do throughout your day. Walking meditation. So when I walk back and forth, instead of saying, what am I going to say next, right? I'm doing a walking meditation. All I'm doing is I'm focusing on my feet touching the ground. I'm going to do that, right? So there's all different ways to meditate, but the prayer is outward, you talking to God, whereas the contemplation meditation is God, spirit, divine, talking to you, your higher self, whatever you want to believe in. Is that clear?
Yeah, it is. And then just to take a
Mhm.
step further, could I use the word situational instead of contemplation? For example, if there's something that I'm interested in, situational, I'm not contemplating about something in the universe,
Mhm.
I'm not contemplating a long passage, but I'm really thinking about something that's important to me. Is that interchangeable with
So the question is if you have a situation going on and you're going to contemplate on that, yes and no. Yes, if you can keep your focus on the situation. So in other words, if you're contemplating, I have to go to Thanksgiving and my whole family is Republican and I'm Democrat, or vice versa, right? And so you're thinking about that. How am I going to I'm contemplating that. How am I going to interact with these people? How can I bring my best ideal forward in this interaction? And then you start thinking about the politics and how you really don't like that person, and you've gone into the dark side, right? You've lost the contemplation. So I would say yes, but. Okay? Any other questions? About anything. Yes. Yep.
So I see that many of the mystics emphasize the need to release passions, to purge passions. And one thing that makes me pause about that and wonder is that injustices, wrongs, evil, that gives me like what might be called righteous indignation, and I'm very passionate about changing it and improving it. And I'm a little concerned, might these kinds of passions also lead?
Krishnamurti was very clear. Oh, so the question is, we have this I'm passionate about injustice, or I'm passionate about something. And that makes me hesitant to say I want to release my passions. Passion is a word that you could almost say, I'd like thoughts better. Thoughts that take me away from my spiritual journey. Right? I think that might be a better way to look at it. But righteous indignation is a passion or a thought that's going to take you away. What you can do is instead of say I getting righteous and indignant about it, Krishnamurti was very clear. If you see a child in trouble that cannot help themselves, you go and help them. He also said, don't do everybody's work for them. If someone can take care of themselves, leave them alone and let them do it, unless they ask you for help. But if you see some right that needs to be wronged because that person is unable to do it themselves, then you should go and do it. That's what service is. And he believed in karma service, not karma service meaning you have to wash the dishes because, you didn't wash your dishes in the past life. Not that kind of karma service. More like the yoga karma service. We need to be of service. So what I would suggest is to use discernment. In other words, you can see that situation isn't healthy, but we don't have to judge the person around it or the situation as good or bad. We would say, what does this discernment that this is not a healthy situation, what action is called for? I don't need to be righteous I'm just mirroring back your words. I could use different words. I don't need to be righteous or indignant about that. I don't need to judge someone. I just need to look and say, is it healthy for me to step in? Because sometimes it isn't. Sometimes somebody needs to fall on their butt and get in trouble, right? But sometimes there's people that do not have the power to help themselves, right? But if you're doing it because you feel, oh, Superwoman, I'm going to go in and save the day, that's a problem. If you're doing it because your heart is pulled, action is called for, you have something you can offer, but you can release. This is one of the things Krishnamurti also told, is we need to, I hate to use those expressions, that it's best to release our expectations of what will happen. That if we do an action, we do the action because we're called to it, because our heart speaks to it, not because someone's going to say, oh, thank you. Or because they're going to. How many times have you lent someone money and then they've gone to the store and bought themselves new boots or something like that? And you're like, you lend them the money. What they do is their own problem. If you don't like it, don't lend them the money. If you can't release, if you can't detach, right? So does that answer your question? That of course you should do what you are called to. But what we're working on as far as those passions is release your attachment to it, your righteousness, and your judgment of it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you should still do what you're called to do. Okay. Yes, in the back then.
Mother Teresa was quoted that, she would not walk for a protest, but she would walk for peace.
You wouldn't want world what? She wouldn't want.
March for a protest,
Oh.
but she would march for a peace.
So what she's saying is Mother Teresa said, I won't march for a protest, but I will march for peace. It's just a different way to look at it. But kind of like with ideals, one of the things that Cayce teaches with ideals, which is really working on these positive attributes, is they are our northern star. They are our guiding principle. We are not going to get there. So I am not going to be able to see something and not get indignant about it or feel righteous about it. But what I'm going to do is when I'm called for action, I'm going to say, how can my actions be as less filled? And how can I work on my judgment versus discernment? But I see something crummy happen and I'm going to get ticked off. I'm sorry. Because we're not expecting to be the mystic right now. But what the thing is to try to look at these and say, where in my life can I practice this? When I'm able, right? When I'm able. Yes.
So this is what I want to clarify. If you're not happy with something that's happening politically,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to get angry, but you can take action like a lawyer. Instead of getting angry about the situation, the lawyer figures out what needs to be done.
Yeah.
That's okay?
In other words, it's okay to say something is wrong here.
Right.
I don't need to judge the other person as bad or good. I don't have to say I'm good, they're bad, right? We are suffering from a consciousness that has to polarize, that has to judge things as good or bad. So if I want to be good, something else has to be bad, right? But what we can recognize is this is not something that I feel is healthy for our world. What action can I take from it? But once you've taken the action, then the next step, which is really hard, that's why they call them mystics and saints, is to let go of attachment to the outcome. I did the best, there it is. So the question was, I'm sorry, I forgot to repeat the question. Did everybody hear the question? We want to make sure that it's okay to act. The issue is we don't need to judge. Does that answer?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? We have another couple minutes if there's any other questions. All right. Just to give you a little bit about the book that I would say would be Cayce's, the simplest to read. Now, if you go to the Search for God groups books, there's 2 books. They are wonderful if you can actually spend that much contemplation time because you have to read the paragraph, reread the paragraph, reread. There is great information, but they've put it in a modern version. So Contemporary Cayce is, I think, one of the best books on, if you want to know what Cayce thought that would be the journey to spiritual enlightenment. And then up here we also have the meditation book, and this is for people like me who are a little high-strung or impatient or just don't have a lot of time. And then these other books we have, this is about a near-death experiencer, and it kind of explains what going into the light is like. If I was to have that spiritually transformative experience, what would I experience? And then this is Past Lives of Jesus. I just thought it'd be interesting. If you're interested in the mystic's journey, this was Jesus's journey through the different past lives to finally come to spiritual maturity or enlightenment. And this is just my other book, Grow Your Spiritual Business. And then how many signatures do we have up there, Rosie? We're going to give away one of my...
27, unless there's someone who wants to...
Did everybody sign up too? Okay. Yep, you guys signed up. So sign up on the email. And then what I'm going to do, okay, have a good, enjoy those grandchildren. And then I'm going to have you guys help me pick a number. But we'll let everybody. You know what? We have. All right, so we're going to be 30. So if it was 20, Rosie, what would it be total? 32. 32, okay. So you guys. How am I going to do this? You know what, Rosie? Go into the bookstore and ask them to pick a number between 1 to 32. Because you guys would know what number you know. I was going to have one side yell out one number and one the other, but we'll just do it a little more scientifically. I love to talk to people on Facebook. My Facebook is up there. My website is there if you have other information. I am teaching some conferences, one on how to deal with empathic abilities. When you pick up on everybody else's CRAP, and it's overwhelming. I'm going to be doing, at that conference, there's going to be a lot of people there that are doing really cool things. I'm going to be actually doing practical exercises and visualizations on how to strengthen your aura and your energetic system. What number do we have?
22.
And who is 22? And then there's another conference, and that's in March. Who? Oh, there she is. Thank you. All right, we have a winner. So then the other conference is in April, and it is on the law of attraction. And I'm going to be talking about how Edgar Cayce suggests that we use vibration and ideals to help us attract what we want in our life. And that one is going to have Mitch Horowitz, if you've ever heard him talk. He is like, you know, Dan Brown's Tom Hanks character. He's that for occultism. He is like the professor of occultism. So it's really going to be exciting. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for spending a morning with me. And I hope to see you around. Thank you very much.